The barn exploded in a shower of sparks just as Sheriff Dean Maverick kicked down the blazing door. Through the wall of orange flames, he spotted her, a woman in a torn blue dress, unconscious against the far wall, smoke already claiming her lungs. "Hold on," Dean roared, pulling his coat over his head as burning timber crashed around them. The old Kellerman barn had been tinderbox dry after 3 weeks without rain, and now it was going up like the devil's own fury. He dove through the flames, his boots crushing burning hay beneath them. The woman's dark hair was singed, her face pale as moonlight, but she was breathing. Dean scooped her into his arms just as the roof began to cave. They burst through the doorway in a tumble of smoke and ash, Dean's shoulder slamming into the dirt as he rolled to protect her from the impact. Behind them, the barn collapsed with a thunderous roar that shook the ground beneath Willow Creek's sleeping residents. "Nora! Oh dear Lord, Nora!" Widow Kellerman came running from her farmhouse, nightgown billowing, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Is she?" "She's alive," Dean gasped, cradling the unconscious woman against his chest. Up close, she was breathtaking, high cheekbones, full lips slightly parted as she breathed, and skin like porcelain despite the soot. "But she needs the doc, and fast." As Dean carried her toward his horse, Nora's eyes fluttered open the deepest green he'd ever seen, like emeralds in candlelight. For a moment, their gazes locked, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with smoke or fire. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice husky from the smoke. "Just doing my job, ma'am." But even as he said it, Dean knew it was a lie. The moment he'd seen her through those flames, something primal had awakened in him, a need to protect this woman that went far beyond duty. Dr. Cornelius Hedge worked over Nora for 2 hours in his cramped office above the general store, while Dean paced the waiting room like a caged wolf. When the door finally opened, the elderly physician emerged, with soot-stained hands and a grim expression. "She'll live," he announced, "but her lungs took a beating. She needs rest, proper care, and someone to watch over her. That smoke poisoning could turn dangerous if she's left alone." "She can stay at my place," Dean heard himself saying before. His brain caught up with his mouth. "I've got a spare room, and Mrs. Patterson can look after her during the day." Dr. Hedge raised an eyebrow. "That's mighty generous of you, Sheriff, but hardly proper for an unmarried man to house a single woman." Dean felt his jaw clench. The thought of Nora staying anywhere else, vulnerable and unprotected, made his blood run cold. "Then what do you suggest?" "Well," the doctor said slowly, a knowing glint in his eye, "there is one solution that would satisfy propriety and ensure she gets the care she needs." That night, as Dean sat beside Nora's bed watching her sleep, her words echoed in his mind. Marriage. The word should have terrified him. He'd been a bachelor for 32 years, sworn to his badge and his solitary life. But looking at this mysterious woman who'd literally fallen into his arms, he felt something shift in his chest, like tectonic plates finding new ground. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why did holding her feel like coming home to a place he'd never been? 3 days later, Nora Bellwether sat in Dean's kitchen, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, watching the sheriff through lowered lashes as he fried eggs at the stove. The morning light caught the bronze in his hair and highlighted the strong line of his jaw, making her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with her recent brush with death. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Cook for me, I mean. I'm perfectly capable." "Doctor's orders?" Dean interrupted, sliding a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "And you're not perfectly anything right now. You nearly died in that fire." Nora picked at her food, her mind racing. She couldn't tell him the truth, that she'd been hiding in that barn because she was running from her stepfather, Cyrus Blackthorne, who'd sold her to the highest bidder like a prize heifer. That the fire had been no accident but Cyrus's way. of eliminating the evidence of her escape. I need to ask you something, Dean said, settling into the chair across from her. His brown eyes were serious, intense in a way that made her stomach flutter. The marriage proposal, Dr. Hedge, wasn't entirely wrong about the propriety issue. This town talks, and your reputation. What reputation? Nora laughed bitterly. I'm nobody from nowhere, Sheriff. I have nothing to lose. That's where you're wrong. Dean leaned forward, his calloused hand covering hers on the table. The touch sent electricity shooting up her arm. You're somebody to me. Before Nora could respond, boots thundered on the front porch, followed by urgent knocking. Dean was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his gun. Sheriff. Sheriff Maverick. The voice belonged to young Tommy Breslin, the telegraph operator. You need to see this right away. Dean opened the door, and Tommy burst in, waving a yellow telegram like a battle flag. His eyes went wide when he spotted Nora at the table. Miss. Oh, thank the Lord you're all right. When we heard about the fire... He thrust the telegram at Dean. This came in an hour ago, from back east. Dean's face darkened as he read. Son of a bitch. Dean? Nora rose slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. There's a bounty on you, he said grimly. $500 for your safe return to one Cyrus Blackthorne of Philadelphia, dead or alive. Nora's coffee cup crashed to the floor, shattering into a dozen pieces. She'd thought she'd bought herself time, that Cyrus would assume she'd died in the fire, but somehow he knew. I have to go, she whispered, already moving toward the door. I can't stay here. I won't bring trouble to you or this town. Dean's hand shot out, catching her wrist. Like hell you're going anywhere. You don't understand, then explain it to me. His grip gentled but didn't release. Whatever you're running from, whoever this Blackthorne is, we'll face it together. Together? Nora stared at him in disbelief. You barely know me. I know enough. Dean pulled her closer, his free hand cupping her face. I know you're brave enough to run toward freedom even if it kills you. I know you're beautiful inside and out. And I know that from the moment I pulled you from those flames, my heart hasn't belonged to me anymore. Tommy cleared his throat awkwardly. Should I go? No, Dean said, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. You should stay and witness something. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. Nora Bellwether, will you marry me? Not for propriety, not for protection, but because I'm falling in love with you faster than a house on fire? Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks. Through the window, she could see riders approaching in the distance, 3 men in dark coats, moving with deadly purpose. They're coming, she whispered. Dean followed her gaze and swore under his breath. Then you better give me an answer fast, darling. Because married or not, I'm not letting them take you. Yes, Nora breathed, her hand tightening. In Dean's. Yes, I'll marry you. Dean surged to his feet and kissed her fiercely, tasting desperation and hope in equal measure. When they broke apart, his eyes were blazing with determination. Tommy, run get Preacher Morrison. Tell him it's an emergency wedding. And find Judge Hartwell, we need this legal and binding. Dean was already moving toward his gun cabinet. And spread the word. Any man with a gun and a conscience should head to the church. Now. As Tommy sprinted out the back door, Dean loaded his rifle with practiced efficiency. How many men does Blackthorne usually send? 3 or 4, Nora said, her voice steadier than she felt. Bounty hunters, mostly. But Dean, you don't understand. Cyrus has money, influence. He owns half of Philadelphia, including judges and lawmen. Even if we marry, he won't stop. Then we'll make sure he can't follow, Dean said grimly. He handed her a small derringer from his desk drawer. Do you know how to use this? Nora's fingers closed around the pearl handle. "My father taught me before he died, before Cyrus took everything." The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Dean peered through the front window and cursed. 4 riders. They're splitting up, 2 coming to the front, 2 to the back. He turned to her, his expression fierce and tender at once. "Whatever happens, I need you to know something. This isn't just about keeping you safe anymore. What I feel for you, it's real, Nora. It's the realest thing I've ever known." Before she could respond, the front door exploded inward. A mountain of a man filled the doorway, his face scarred and mean, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice thick with menace. "Virgil Crane, bounty hunter. And you must be the little bird that flew the coop." His eyes fixed on Nora with predatory hunger. "Mr. Blackthorne sends his regards, Missy. Time to come home." "She's not going anywhere," Dean said, his rifle trained on Crane's chest. Crane laughed, a sound like grinding gravel. "That tin star don't mean nothing out here, boy. We got papers saying she's stolen property, legal and binding." "Stolen property?" Dean's voice was deadly quiet. "She's a human being. She's Blackthorne's ward, signed over legal-like when her daddy died in debt. And she's promised in marriage to Blackthorne's business partner." Crane's grin revealed rotted teeth. "So you see, Sheriff, you're harboring stolen goods." The back door crashed open, and 2 more men appeared, lean and vicious-looking, with the cold eyes of professional killers. But before they could level their weapons, shots rang out from the street. "What the hell?" Crane spun toward the sound. Through the windows, Nora could see the townsfolk of Willow Creek emerging from buildings with rifles and shotguns. Preacher Morrison stood in the middle of the street, his Bible in one hand and a Colt .45 in the other. "This is a God-fearing town," the preacher called out, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air. "And we don't take kindly to men who trade in human misery." Judge Hartwell appeared beside him, flanked by a dozen armed citizens. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I'm ordering you to stand down. That woman is under the protection of this community." Crane's face twisted with rage. "You backwater idiots don't know who you're messing with." "Neither do you," Dean said softly, and pulled the trigger. The shot took Crane in the shoulder, spinning him around. His shotgun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as he crashed to the floor. The other 2 bounty hunters found themselves facing the business ends of a dozen rifles as the townspeople surged forward. Within minutes, the 3 intruders were trussed up like Christmas turkeys, bleeding and cursing but thoroughly defeated. The 4th had fled during the chaos, spurring his horse eastward as fast as it could carry him. "Well," Judge Hartwell said, stepping over Crane's groaning form, "shall we proceed with this wedding? I'd say we've got ourselves some motivated witnesses." 30 minutes later, Nora stood before the altar of Willow Creek's small church, her hand clasped in Dean's, wearing a borrowed dress from the preacher's wife. Half the town had crammed into the pews, still armed and ready for trouble, but their faces were warm with joy and approval. "Do you, Dean Maverick, take Nora Bellwether to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Dean said, his voice strong and clear. "Before God and this community, I promise to love, honor, and protect her for all the days of my life." "And do you, Nora Bellwether, take Dean Maverick to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Nora looked into Dean's brown eyes and saw her future not just safety, but adventure, passion, and a love that would burn brighter than any fire. "I do," she whispered, and sealed her fate with a kiss that tasted like freedom. The wedding celebration lasted until dawn, fueled by corn whiskey and the kind of raucous joy that comes from standing together against outside threats. But as the last of the townsfolk stumbled home through the early morning light, Dean and Nora finally found themselves alone in the church. "Mrs. Maverick," Dean said softly, testing the name on his tongue as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. I like the sound of that. Nora's cheeks flushed pink. It feels like a dream. Yesterday I was nobody, running for my life. Today She gestured helplessly. Today you're my wife, Dean finished, his thumb tracing her lower lip. And tomorrow we figure out how to keep Blackthorn from sending more men. The mention of her stepfather's name made Nora's smile falter. Dean, I need to tell you something. About why Cyrus wants me back so badly. She took a shaky breath. My father didn't just die in debt. He discovered something, evidence that Cyrus has been embezzling from the railroad company they worked for. Thousands of dollars. Dean's eyes sharpened. What kind of evidence? Ledgers, correspondence, receipts. Papa hid them before he died. Told me where to find them if anything happened to him. Nora's hands trembled as she reached into her bodice and withdrew a small leather pouch. I managed to grab these before I ran. Dean opened the pouch and whistled low. Inside were several folded documents covered in neat handwriting and official seals. This is enough to hang him. Why didn't you take this to the authorities? Because Cyrus owns the authorities. Nora's voice cracked with old pain. The police, the judges, even some of the federal marshals. Papa tried to report him once, and that's when the accidents started happening. A fire at Papa's office, a runaway. Carriage that nearly trampled him, contaminated food that made him violently ill. Her eyes filled with tears. I think Cyrus finally just poisoned him outright. Dean pulled her against his chest, his arms tightening protectively around her. He can't touch you here. I won't let him. You don't understand how far his reach extends. And he doesn't understand how far mine does. Dean's voice was granite. This is the frontier, darling. Out here, a man's word and his gun matter more than his bank account. And you've got the protection of every soul in this town. As if summoned. By his words, a commotion erupted outside the church. Through the windows, they could see riders approaching, but these weren't bounty hunters. The lead rider wore a familiar badge, and Dean's face lit up with recognition. Well, I'll be damned. He grinned. That's Marshal Jeremiah Cross. We served together in the cavalry before I took this job. Marshal Cross was a tall, weathered man with steel-gray hair and eyes like winter sky. He dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent more years in the saddle than on foot, and his handshake with Dean was firm and warm. Got your telegram, Cross said without preamble. Bounty hunters operating outside federal jurisdiction, threatening a lawful citizen. That tends to ruffle my feathers. His gaze shifted to Nora, and his expression softened. Ma'am, I understand. You've had quite an ordeal. Marshal, Nora said carefully, I should warn you that my stepfather has considerable influence with federal officials back east. Cross's smile was sharp as a blade. Funny thing about corruption, Mrs. Maverick, it tends to leave a trail. And I've been following Cyrus Blackthorn's trail for the better part of 2 years now. Nora's knees nearly buckled. You know about Cyrus? Know about him? Hell, darlin', I've been trying to build a case against him since he started bribing railroad inspectors to overlook safety violations. 3 train derailments in Pennsylvania last year that killed dozens of innocent folks. Cross's voice was grim. But he's slippery as a greased pig, and every witness we find either disappears or suddenly develops amnesia. Dean felt Nora stiffen against him. She's got evidence, he said quietly. Ledgers, documents. Her father gathered them before Blackthorn. Had him killed. Cross's eyes went wide. You're Jacob Bellwether's daughter? Christ almighty, girl, do you have any idea how long we've been looking for those documents? Papa said to trust no one in authority, Nora whispered. He said Cyrus had bought too many badges. Smart man, your father, and he was right to be careful. Cross removed his hat respectfully. But I'm not bought, Mrs. Maverick. Neither are the men riding with me. We're clean, and we're here to finish what your father started. As if on cue, 2 more riders appeared, a federal judge from Denver and a prosecutor from the territorial capital. Both men looked grim and determined, and both carried the kind of authority that even Cyrus Blackthorn's money couldn't buy. Looks like your stepfather's chickens are finally coming home to roost, Dean said, pressing a kiss to Nora's temple. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that Cyrus wouldn't go down without a fight. And when cornered animals fought back, innocent people often got hurt. She just prayed that Dean wouldn't be one of them. By noon, word had spread through Willow Creek that federal marshals were in town, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Judge Cornelius Whitmore had set up court in the town hall, while Marshal Cross and his men secured the evidence Nora had provided. Dean stood guard outside, his rifle cradled in his arms, watching the horizon for trouble. Inside, Nora sat at a rough wooden table, her hands shaking as she gave her testimony. The documents spread before the judge painted a damning picture: falsified inspection reports, bribery receipts, correspondence proving Cyrus had knowingly allowed unsafe trains to run, all in the name of profit. Mrs. Maverick, Judge Whitmore said gently, this is extraordinary evidence. But I have to ask, are you prepared for the consequences of coming forward? Mr. Blackthorn will undoubtedly retaliate. Before Nora could answer, the door burst open and Tommy Breslin stumbled in, his face white as fresh snow. Judge, Marshal, he gasped. Telegraph just came in from the east. Blackthorn's on his way. He's bringing 20 men, maybe more, armed to the teeth and asking no questions. Marshal Cross was on his feet instantly. How far out? 2 days, maybe 3 if they stop to rest their horses. But that's not all. Tommy swallowed hard. He's got federal warrants signed by Judge Morrison in Philadelphia. Claims Mrs. Maverick stole valuable property and fled to avoid prosecution for murder. Nora's blood turned to ice. Murder? Whose murder? Your father's, Cross said grimly, reading over the telegram. Bastards claiming you poisoned Jacob Bellwether to steal his business documents. Very clever, makes you look like the criminal and gives him legal justification for bringing an army. But that's insane, Nora protested. Papa was my father. I loved him. Doesn't matter if it's true, Judge Whitmore said quietly. Those warrants will give Blackthorn's men legal authority to operate here, and with 20 guns backing him up. Dean appeared in the doorway, his face set in hard lines. Marshal, we need to talk, now. They stepped outside where the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. Despite the warm weather, Dean felt winter in his bones. This town's got maybe 15 men who can handle a gun in a real fight, Dean said without preamble. Good men, brave men, but they're shopkeepers and farmers, not gunfighters. Against 20 professional killers, it'll be a massacre, Cross finished. I know. I'm thinking we should evacuate Mrs. Maverick, get her somewhere safe while, no. The voice was Nora's, and both men turned to see her standing in the doorway, her chin raised defiantly. I won't run anymore. And I won't let this town pay for my mistakes. Darling, this isn't about mistakes, Dean said, reaching for her hands. This is about survival. Is it? Nora's green eyes blazed with newfound determination. Or is it about standing up to a monster who's been terrorizing people for years? Marshal, you said 3 train derailments, dozens of deaths. How many more people will die if we let Cyrus continue? Cross studied her with new respect. What are you proposing? We end this, here now, today. Nora pulled the remaining documents from her bodice. These aren't just financial records. Papa documented everything, The bribes, the threats, the murders, including his own. She unfolded a letter written in her father's careful script, dated the day before he died. Dean read over her shoulder, his expression growing darker with each line. Son of a bitch kept a diary, he breathed. Right up until the end. Papa knew Cyrus was going to kill him. He wrote down everything, the poison in his evening coffee, the doctor Cyrus bribed to falsify the death certificate, even the name of the man who delivered the poison. Nora's voice was steady as stone. We don't just have evidence of financial crimes, Marshal. We have proof of murder. Judge Whitmore appeared beside them, reading the documents with widening eyes. This changes everything. With this testimony, I can issue federal warrants for Blackthorn's arrest. Murder supersedes any local jurisdictional claims he might have. But he's still coming with 20 guns, Dean pointed out. Then we better make sure we're ready for him. Marshal Cross's smile was wolfish. Judge, how fast can you get those warrants drawn up? Give me an hour. Good. Tommy, send telegrams to every federal marshal within 100 miles. Tell them we've got the evidence to bring down Cyrus Blackthorn, but we need backup. Cross turned to Dean. Sheriff, how do you feel about turning your town into a fortress? Dean looked at his wife, his brave, beautiful wife who'd chosen to stand and fight rather than run and hide, and felt his chest swell with pride. I feel like Cyrus Blackthorn picked the wrong town to mess with, he said quietly, and the wrong woman to threaten. As the sun began to set over Willow Creek, the townspeople worked with grim efficiency to prepare for war. Barricades went up across the main street, windows were boarded and turned into gun ports, and every man, woman, and older child who could hold a weapon was armed and ready. But it was the telegram that arrived just before dark that changed everything. It's from the territorial governor, Tommy announced, his voice shaking with excitement. He's declaring martial law and sending 2 companies of cavalry. They'll be here tomorrow morning. Nora felt Dean's arm tighten around her waist. Looks like Cyrus is the one who's going to be outnumbered, he murmured in her ear. For the first time in years, Nora Maverick allowed herself to believe that freedom might actually be possible. Dawn broke gray and cold over Willow Creek, bringing with it the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Dean stood on the church bell tower, spyglass in hand, watching the dust cloud that marked Cyrus Blackthorn's arrival. Behind him, the town waited in tense silence, every door barricaded, every window fortified, every citizen armed and ready. 23 riders, Dean called down to Marshal Cross. Blackthorn's in the lead, riding a black stallion like he thinks he's Napoleon. Through the spyglass, Dean got his first look at the man who'd tormented his wife for years. Cyrus Blackthorn was tall and lean, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked carved from granite. He rode with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been told no, surrounded by hard-faced gunmen who looked like they'd kill their own mothers for the right price. But it was the figure riding beside Blackthorn that made Dean's blood run. Cold, a woman in black silk, her face hidden beneath a heavy veil. Nora, Dean called down, you need to see this. Nora climbed the ladder to the bell tower, her movements quick and sure despite her still healing injuries. When Dean handed her the spyglass, she focused on the approaching riders and gasped. Vivian. She breathed. That's Vivian Ashworth, Cyrus single quotes S. companion. Papa always said she was more dangerous than Cyrus himself. What's she doing here? Insurance, Nora said grimly. Vivian has connections in places even Cyrus can't reach. If their legal approach fails, she'll find other ways to get what they want. Below them, the riders had stopped at the edge of town. Cyrus sat motionless on his stallion, studying the barricades and gun ports with calculating eyes. Even from a distance, his voice carried clearly in the morning air. Citizens of Willow Creek, He called out, his tone reasonable and cultured. "I am Cyrus Blackthorne, here on federal business. I have warrants for the arrest of one Nora Bellwether, wanted for theft and murder. Surrender her now and no harm. We'll come to your town." Marshal Cross stepped into the middle of the street, his badge glinting in the weak sunlight. "And I'm Marshal Jeremiah Cross, also here on federal business. I have warrants for your arrest, Blackthorne, on charges of bribery, conspiracy, and murder. You're the one who needs to surrender." The Blackthorne's laugh was like breaking glass. "My dear Marshal, I'm afraid you're operating under false pretenses. The woman you're protecting is a known criminal who poisoned her own father and stole valuable documents." "Surely you can see." "What I can see," Cross interrupted, "is a man who's about to find out that his money can't buy him everything." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, from the north, came the sound every soul in Willow Creek had been praying for, the bugle call of approaching cavalry. 2 companies of blue-coated soldiers crested the hill, their sabers gleaming, their horses fresh and eager for action. At their head rode Colonel Marcus Steele, a man whose reputation had been forged in the fires of the Civil War and tempered in a dozen Indian campaigns. Blackthorne's face went ashen as the soldiers formed ranks behind Marshal Cross. His gunmen shifted nervously in their saddles, suddenly aware that they were vastly outnumbered. "Colonel Steele," Marshal Cross called out, "perfect timing. We have federal fugitives who need arresting." "My pleasure, Marshal," the colonel replied, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "Mr. Blackthorne, you and your men will lay down your weapons and submit to federal custody." "This is preposterous," Blackthorne sputtered. "I have legal warrants. I have rights." "What you have," Colonel Steele said coldly, "is about 30 seconds to comply before I order my men to open fire." For a moment, Dean thought Blackthorne might actually fight. The man's face was twisted with rage and disbelief, his hands clenched white-knuckled on his reins. But then Vivian Ashworth leaned over and whispered something in his ear, and his expression changed to something far more dangerous, calculating malice. "Very well," Blackthorne said finally, his voice smooth as silk. "I bow to superior force. But this isn't over, Marshal, not by a long shot." As Blackthorne and his men dismounted and submitted to arrest, Nora felt Dean's hand close over hers on the bell tower. "It's over, darling," he said softly. "You're free." But even as the words left his lips, Dean caught sight of Vivian Ashworth's face as her veil slipped. Her eyes were fixed on the bell tower, and her smile was the coldest thing he'd ever seen. Somehow, Dean knew this was far from over. That night, as the prisoners were secured in a makeshift jail and the cavalry made camp outside town, Dean and Nora finally found themselves alone in their small house. The events of the day had left them both drained, but there was something else in the air, a tension that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the fact that they were husband and wife, alone together for the first time. "I can't believe it's really over," Nora said, standing by the window in her white nightgown, moonlight turning her skin to pearl. Dean came up behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "Are you disappointed? Part of me thought you might miss the excitement." Nora turned in his arms, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. "The only excitement I want now is the kind that comes with building a life with my husband." Dean's breath caught. "Nora, I know this marriage started as protection," she said, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "But what I feel for you, it's real, Dean. It's the most real thing in my life." "Thank God," Dean breathed and kissed her with all the pent-up passion and fear and love of the past week. "Because I was about to go crazy pretending this was just duty." 6 months later, Nora Maverick stood in the garden behind her house, her hands covered in rich earth as she transplanted seedlings in the warm spring sunshine. The morning sickness had finally passed. and she was beginning to show just the slightest curve beneath her blue calico dress. "Mrs. Maverick, you shouldn't be doing heavy work in your condition," scolded Martha Patterson, the town's unofficial midwife and mother hen to everyone under 60. "Planting flowers hardly qualifies as heavy work," Nora laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Besides, Dean's orders were to keep busy, not to become an invalid. The trial of Cyrus Blackthorne had become the sensation of the territory. Evidence of his crimes had poured in from across the country, families who'd lost loved ones in his railway accidents, federal inspectors who'd been bribed to look the other way, and a dozen other victims who'd finally found the courage to speak out. He'd been sentenced to life in federal prison, a broken man who discovered that money couldn't buy everything after all. Vivian Ashworth had vanished the night before the trial began, slipping away like smoke in the darkness. Marshall Cross suspected she'd fled to Mexico or Europe, but Dean wasn't concerned. Without Cyrus's money and connections, she was just another grifter running from a past that had finally caught up with her. "Nora," Dean's voice carried across the garden, warm with affection and just a hint of exasperation. "What did Doc Hedges say about overdoing it?" She looked up to see her husband striding toward her, his sheriff's badge catching the sunlight. Even after 6 months of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart skip like a schoolgirl's. He was everything she'd never dared dream of: strong, honorable, gentle, and completely devoted to her happiness. "He said light activity was good for me," she replied primly, accepting his kiss on her forehead. "And our child needs to know the feel of honest soil beneath our hands." Dean's expression softened as his palms settled over the small swell of her belly. "How are you both feeling today?" "Hungry, restless, and absolutely perfect," Nora said, covering his hand with hers. "The baby's been active all morning. I think he's going to be a handful, just like his father." Dean corrected with a grin. "She's going to be beautiful. And stubborn and drive me to distraction, just like her mother." "We'll see about that in 3 months," Nora said, leaning into his warmth. "Either way, he or she will grow up free, safe, and loved beyond measure." A commotion from the main street interrupted their peaceful moment. Through the garden gate, they could see Tommy Breslin running toward them, waving a telegram with his characteristic enthusiasm. "Sheriff, Mrs. Maverick." He called breathlessly. "You need to see this." Dean sighed and helped Nora to her feet. "What now, Tommy?" The young telegraph operator thrust the yellow paper at them, practically bouncing with excitement. "It's from the territorial governor's office. You've been recommended for a federal marshal's position, Sheriff. They want you to head up a new task force investigating corruption in the railway system." Dean read the telegram twice, his eyebrows rising with each line. "Well, I'll be damned. They're offering twice my current salary and jurisdiction across 3 territories. That's wonderful, darling." Nora squeezed his arm, though something flickered in her eyes. "It's exactly the kind of work you were meant to do." "There's just one problem," Dean said slowly, his gaze meeting hers. "The position is based out of Denver. We'd have to leave Willow Creek." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. This town had become their sanctuary, the place where they'd found each other and built their love from the ashes of Nora's terrifying past. The people here weren't just neighbors, they were family who'd stood with them against impossible odds. "What do you want to do?" Nora asked quietly. Dean folded the telegram and slipped it into his vest pocket. "I want to do whatever makes you happiest, Mrs. Maverick. You've had enough upheaval for one lifetime." Nora considered this, one hand resting on her growing belly. The baby kicked against her palm as if offering an opinion on the matter. "Do you know what I was thinking about this morning while I planted those seeds?" she said finally. "I was thinking about roots. How some plants need to stay in one place to grow strong, and others need to spread their seeds on the wind to find new ground. Dean's mouth quirked upward. And which kind are we? The spreading kind, I think. Nora's smile was radiant. This baby is going to inherit a world where corruption and cruelty can be challenged, where justice isn't just for those who can afford to buy it. If we can be part of making that world, shouldn't we? Even if it means leaving our home? Nora looked around at the garden she'd planted, the house where they'd first made love, the town that had embraced her as one of their own. Then she looked at Dean, her husband, her protector, her partner in all things, and felt her heart swell with certainty. Home isn't a place, Dean Maverick. Home is wherever we're together. 2 weeks later, half the town of Willow Creek gathered at the train station to see them off. Martha Patterson wept openly as she pressed a basket of food into Nora's hands. Judge Hartwell shook Dean's hand gravely and promised to keep an eye on their property. Even gruff old Doc Hedges managed a few kind words about taking care of themselves. And that baby Dot as the train whistle blew and steam began to build. Preacher Morrison stepped forward with a small leather-bound book. "Something to remember us by," he said, pressing it into Dean's hands. The story of how Sheriff Dean pulled Nora from a fire and made her his bride. Figure your children ought to know how their parents' love story began. Dean opened the book to find page after page of handwritten accounts from the townspeople, their memories of the fire, the wedding, the standoff with Blackthorn, and everything that followed. It was their story, preserved in the words of those who'd witnessed it. "Thank you," Dean said roughly, emotion thick in his voice. "All of you, for everything." As the train pulled away from the station, Nora pressed her face to the window and watched Willow Creek disappear into the distance. She felt Dean's arm around her shoulders and leaned into his strength. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Nora placed her hand over his where it rested on her belly, feeling their child stir beneath her palm. Ahead of them lay Denver, new challenges, and a chance to build something bigger than themselves. Behind them lay the ashes of her old life and the memories of how love could bloom in the most impossible circumstances. "Only one," she said, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "I regret that it took a fire to bring us together, but I wouldn't change a single moment of what came after." Dean kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, as the train carried them toward whatever adventures awaited. And in that moment, with her husband's arms around her and their child growing beneath her heart, Nora Maverick knew that she was exactly where she belonged. The fire that had nearly killed her had actually saved her in every way that mattered. It had brought her Dean's love, the protection of an entire community, and the strength to face her demons and win. Most importantly, it had given her the chance to choose her own destiny. As the Wyoming landscape rolled past the train window, painted gold by the setting sun, Nora closed her eyes and smiled. Whatever came next, she would face it with courage, knowing that love, real, honest, passionate love, was the strongest force in the world, and she and Dean had enough of it to light up the entire frontier.